It's not the first time we're having by-elections in this Fourth Republic, and definitely it will not be the last. But then there are so many other issues around this, so let's just plunge right into it. Fred Nzako joins us this morning. He's a legal practitioner, and he's right here with us in the studio. Thank you so much for your time.
Many thanks. Good morning.
As well as Hamzat Lawa, who is a campaigner and chief executive of Connected Development Code. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Lawal. Well, let me begin with you. Mr. Lawal in Abuja, so you have seen these elections, at least read up on them, and found out a number of things, picked information here and there about this by-election. What's your assessment? Any developments or anything we haven't still learned that we need to improve on?
Well, thank you for having me. When you look closely, first, we must commend INEC for undertaking these elections. And when you also look at data, relatively the election was peaceful. When you look at the role of security agencies, we've seen improvement. But then again, we're still experiencing voter apathy. The turnout was relatively low. We didn't even get up to 50% of turnout during this by-election. So when you look closely, we're still not learning from our previous elections in terms of ensuring that voters come out and ensure that they contribute their role in a democratic process. Again, when you also look at the enforcement of COVID-19 protocols, you know, our security agencies were not on ground to support INEC to ensure that people were wearing their face masks and enforcing physical distances. You know, there's been some other discrepancies around, particularly in Zamfara State, where our partner, Yaga Africa's observer, was maltreated. You know, he was attacked doing his civic duty. Again, you know, we've seen also disruption in some states where some other states, you know, the results have been declared inconclusive. This was a by-election, not as many polling stations were open. So I see no reason why we could not deploy as many security officials to support INEC, you know, to undertake their constitutional mandate.
What does that signify? The fact that we didn't have a good number of, a significant enough number of security operatives. What for you does that signify?
I think that it shows the lack of investment in Nigeria's security apparatus, and it shows that there is no proper coordination between INEC and our security architecture. Again, civil society organization and connected development have always said that we need to ensure that this approach are holistic. If we must enjoy the dividends of democracy and have free and fair elections that are not manipulative, the security agencies must protect lives and property during this exercise. I believe also this is an opportunity looking forward to subsequent election, particularly the 2023 elections, where we can boast the confidence of the electorate. Maybe, and when you tie it, the fact that you don't have a lot of security personnel on ground to provide protection, this would also contribute towards voter apathy because people need to feel safe before they can come out and cast a ballot.
Thank you, Mr. Nzako. Two issues he has raised here: voter apathy and inadequate security. What's your take?
Yes, there was a lot of voter apathy, and that cannot be explained very easily because it was expected that quite a couple of people who have been disenchanted with the system would have been more interested in participating in the process. But then what could have led to that voter apathy? Part of the challenges was a build-up to the election proper. One of the responsibilities of political parties, as we all know it, is they need to present credible candidates for elections. It is not the duty of the electorate. It is the duty of the political parties. And that is why it is very essential that primary election, which is the process of selection of the running candidates for every political party, is very important and the key. But what you find out is that build up to this election, there was quite a lot of infractions on the primaries. Take, for example, in Imo State, where as at Friday, a day to the election, there was no clear candidate. And the returning officer of the senatorial zone, Imo North, now declared a party and could not return any candidate as validly having won the election. Because out of the two major contenders, Frankie Bezim and Ifeanyi Adarume, there are two different court decisions. One from Court of Appeal, the other from Federal High Court Abuja. And that is an infraction of the process. So what do you expect the voter to do in that instance? If the voter is going to the polling booth to cast a vote, yes, you are casting a vote for your political party, but you have in mind a particular individual that you want to represent you at any level in government. So what do you now expect the voter to do? And similar thing happened in many other areas. So the political parties themselves are not doing exactly what they should do. And I can tell you that because of the multiple judgments coming from different courts, it undermines the integrity even of the judiciary and carpets the political process. So that is a major fundamental cause of voter apathy. Now, there was inadequate awareness. Recall that the by-election would have held on October 31st. It was shifted by 5 weeks. And so many people didn't know. Many people were caught unawares. As much as Lagosians are literate and information savvy, so many of them, as at Friday evening, they don't know that there will be election the next day on Sunday. I mean, these are challenges and problems that must be taken care of. Yes.
We'll get to security because that's the other side of the question. But you mentioned Lagos. You were comparing, well, you started with Imo State, for example. You were saying that there were varying court orders. But in Lagos, which you also touched on, if you look at the voter turnout, for example, in Bejuleki, over 100,000 people were registered, but only about 17% came out to vote, 17,000. In Koshofe, over 300,000 people registered, but accredited voters was 17,000. That's about 5%. If you go to Shomolu, 6%, Ikorodu, 7%. I mean, not even up to 30% or 50%. There were no court judgments, no conflicts in court judgments in Lagos. So how do we explain that?
Another major thing that we needed to look at is why this level of apathy? When people feel, when the electorate feel that their votes don't count, that whether they vote or not, it really does not matter. You will see a lot of them, when you interact with them, telling you they have already known who to send there. And there is need for such narrative to be changed. There's need for such idea to be changed in the minds of the people. When the people lay back and feel, it doesn't mind whether I vote or not. The electorate don't know that every vote counts. It is 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 that add up to 100. And then if everybody sits back at home, that 100 will reduce to 0, or even 1. And that's exactly what you're saying, that at most in some places, 17%, 20%, that is a far cry from the expectations of the now.
Mr. Nzako,
yes.
We have had this progression for years.
Yes.
Let me ask Mr. Lowell this, and you've probably done some study along this line. Since this Fourth Republic began, we have had a progressive reduction in the number of people who come out to vote, irrespective of the number of people that are accredited, just as my colleague has quoted here, giving the example of Lagos. So many people, register to vote, and very, very minimal figures, percentage of people come out to vote. We have been talking about this forever. What is missing? You have hinted at the likelihood that there is distrust in the system. If we do not have that distrust returned, and we do not have the figures increase of people who select their leaders, where are we headed?
Well, I think we need to also understand that the fact that people are not coming out to cast their vote has an political economic implication, in the sense that some people are cashing out of the fact that people are not coming out to cast their vote. If you look at statistics, 30% of the population is deciding for 100% of people. So what this means is, just a few people determine who becomes legislators, but at State Assembly and National Assembly. We must integrate and embrace technology. We cannot live in a generation generation where it is easier for you to get your ATM card, it is easier for you to register your BVN than going to register and collect your voter's card. Our generation is a technology-driven generation. Now we're talking about 22nd century solutions. And here we are casting our ballot and standing hours on the hot sun. So again, there's an opportunity here. And you must also understand that the political parties themselves are the ones who are ensuring that INEC does not focus on her constitutional mandates. They've brought a lot of politics and heated the polity and taking INEC's core mandate away from them. You cannot take the fact away that political parties also have a responsibility to educate electorate. So why are we not seeing a lot of political party, undertake mass mobilization and raising that awareness? We always say INEC should raise awareness, but it's a collective responsibility between INEC, political parties, civil society, and even citizens. So again, let's see how we can integrate technology. We've seen other countries that have integrated technology. You've seen high turnout of voters. Again, I need to correct this misconception. Votes actually count. Vote counts when citizens hold INEC responsible. And we must also ensure that, and I agree with my brother in the studio, we must ensure that the judiciary does not have as much interference. If our judiciary keep dictating on who gets on the ballot or who win an election after the election is being conducted, it shows that our internal party process is faulty. An ideal case is let's fix the internal party process so that we don't put a lot of pressure in the judiciary. If we continue to go to the court, yes, the court is that's our last option as ordinary citizens. But then again, judiciary interference in a political and democratic process, it will bring about crisis. So again, let's look at technology and innovation. Let's support INEC to meet their mandate. And this goes to, the constitution amendment, particularly the Electoral Act. I believe this could be President Muhammadu Buhari's legacy because he has nothing to gain or lose. So let's have the National Assembly debate this amendment, pass this into law, and send for presidential assent ahead of 2023. So there's no enough pressure on INEC. We saw what happened ahead of 2019 elections. Let's give them the legal and regulatory and financial framework so that they can meet their roles and responsibility and citizens can start building confidence in the electoral process.
Well, you talked about the political economy, and I'd like you to explore that really, because you said some people cash out on voters not showing up to vote, and you said there's a political economy in that. So what are you talking about exactly? How does that work? Because a lot of people are wondering, oh, there's a political economy? Please tell us.
So you see, one thing that we have failed as political and history students is the fact that we look at politics as a process where during election, that's only when we need to engage. But politics is a sector. The same way you have the media, you have the financial sector, you have different sectors. Politics is a sector. Now let's look at data, and I would use poverty data to explain political economy. When you look at data, before COVID-19, over 80 million people were very poor. So what this means is they can't afford 360 naira daily. So they can't afford 3 square meals. They pay out of pocket for education and for healthcare. Post-COVID-19 era, over 15 million people were very poor. To a politician, to an average politician, this is an investment. Politics to them is an investment. So they take money. And by the way, when you look at Yaga report, we see voters' inducement. So what they do is they take money, because our politicians are money bags. So they take money, they induce politicians, and they buy votes. So for them, it's a transaction. So that's why we call it a political economy. So on election day, they do buying and selling. So they buy votes, and you who sell your vote have sold, your dividends and your voice for the next 4 years. So that's why we call it political economy. But what's important here for viewers is the fact that let's see politics as a sector where you learn, where you unlearn, and where you contribute. And all of us equally must contribute and play our role in this political sector.
Well, this by-election was organized by INEC. And we know that at least INEC, to a large extent, organizes elections into the National Assembly, the State Houses of Assembly, the governorship election. We have 5 elections, 5 levels of representatives that INEC organizes elections for State House of Assembly, Senate, House of Representatives, that's for the legislature, of course the executive, the president and the vice president, as well as the governor and deputy governor. But then there is another level, and that is the level of state independent electoral commissions, which organizes elections into local governments for council chairman and councillors, another level of representation altogether for people. Let's take a sneak peek into that sector for a moment. It will seem like if we are having challenges getting people to be interested in the people they represent, that represent them at the National Assembly, they employ into the National Assembly, how much of a hoot would they give for local government elections?
Well, when you look at history and precedent, and I'll take it from 2015, a lot of states have not conducted local government elections. We hardly hear about local government chairmen. So what you hear is administrators, that have been appointed by the state governors. Again, when you look at it closely, the executive governors sort of take controls of the state electoral process. They decide and determine when local government elections are being held. And when you look, there's a lot of interference, and discrepancies around that. Again, maybe this is also an opportunity when we look at the Electoral Act. Let's have a unified system of election, both at local, state, and national level. Let's have one electoral body that is truly independent and represents the interest of the country, undertake these elections without interference. In most states in the country, and this goes to both party divide, sadly, we're not running a two-party system, but in reality, this is a two-party state, PDP and APC, sadly so. It's from the two-party decide.
Just one moment.
Rather. So it's not as if
my
apologies. PDP-led state.
My apologies. But that point that you just raised now about having a central electoral body that takes charge of elections for the federal, state, and local government is already being looked at some people, by some people as, wait a minute, is there an agenda here? Let me ask you, Mr. Zako. So that conversation is being contested. We've had this back and forth between the one of the resident electoral commissioners of INEC and the state independent electoral commission saying, look, we don't want that. But then the challenges are confronting us in the face. That level of election, or level of representation is definitely having issues. How do we address it?
You made a remark, Ayo, that there has been steady decline in voter participation in our elections, and it came to an embarrassing level in this past by-election. The figure is continuously declining, and we are trying to look at all facets of reasons that may cause that. Democracy is government of the people, for the people, and by the people. And they said in local parlance that every politics is local. Then you now ask yourself, where do the people reside? They reside at the local level. If the people reside at the local level, what happens at that level? There are 3 tiers of government in Nigeria, federal, state, and local. What happens at the local government level, where the people actually reside? What you find out is that there is no democracy at that level. So what Nigeria practices is incomplete.
But what's responsible for that?
I'm coming, I'll tell you why. What Nigeria practices today is incomplete or total democracy. We don't practice democracy as we should practice, because there is no democracy at the grassroots, where the people really reside. And if the people at that level don't have democracy, you don't expect them to be very much interested in sending somebody to Abuja when they cannot send somebody to represent them at the council seat, at the council election.
You get to that.
Yes.
But the elections are held at the ward level.
The elections,
and they are collated from that level, and
the man in Abuja, in fact, the voter from experience, if you are electing somebody to represent you as a president, you may not have ever seen him. You are electing somebody to represent you as a governor, you may not have ever seen him. And they sent you to a National Assembly. The closer to the people is the council election, the chairman and the councillors. But from 2013, 2003, ever since the National Electoral Body stopped handling elections into the council elections, no state in Nigeria has conducted a credible election at the state level. And what do I mean? At the local government level, all you have is either caretaker committee chairman or administrators. And these are people that are selected in government offices. Ayo, look back in your state. Look back to your state. When last was there local government election in your state? Can you look back to your state? My own state, Anambra, has there been local government election since 2014. And the one that was held was more or less a charade. It wasn't an election, it was a mock election. And even in that mockery, what the governors would do was to just handpick and select people to send them to the local government areas.
So you're referring to the credibility of the election, not the fact that it was not conducted.
Not only credibility, it is a mockery, what you call a mock election in all the states, because every governor, every political party that runs any state wins 100% of the seats at local government election. So you call that an election, and that is why
is it impossible?
It is impossible, because the trajectory cannot be complete. That north, east, west, and south, every state, it is the same thing. As if that is what the governors go to do in their governors forum. So if PDP is in this state 100% when they conduct an election at local level, but when INEC conducts an election, you see difference. PDP will win some, APC will win some party will win some. But as far as his local government election, and that is why it is a mockery of Section 7 of the Constitution that provides for local government system. It's a mockery of Section 197 of the Constitution that provides for the state independent electoral commission. That word independent must be thrown away, because not only are they independent, they cannot even stand outside the pockets of the governors.
Mr. Nzako,
yes.
That one also is, there is an issue about that for some people who say there is a provision for the president, the National Assembly clearly spelled out, and the president, the state houses of assembly, and the governors, but there is no such section that represents the local government, the chairman of the assembly at the local government level, the supervisors and the rest of them, as well as the chairman.
It is the duty of the state independent in quote, electoral commissions to bring that structure out, because it is provided for in the Constitution. The same way the duty of the local government...
But you also know that it's the same Constitution that pretty much says, look, states and local governments have to cohabit one way or another. There is that. That's why there is that joint local...
Yeah, but that is the contradiction of the 1999 Constitution that we are talking about.
So
when people say that the Constitution is anti-development, what do you think we are talking about? The state local government joint account, as provided for in section 162 of the Constitution, has scaled the local government administration at the state level. At the end of the day, what happens is that even the funds accruing to local government end up in the pockets of the state governors.
So whose task then?
At the end of the day, when you want to extricate the local government from the stranglehold of the governors, they will resort to the Constitution, because the Constitution itself, contradicting itself, has made the state houses of assembly to be in charge of local government's administration and system in Nigeria.
If that is the case, then
yes,
would you then blame the governors for doing what they do? But we'll go to that.
I'll blame the governors, and I'll tell you why I blame them.
We'll take that on when we return from this break. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Mr. Lowell, clearly from what Mr. Nzako has said here, it would seem like the responsibility of getting it right at the local government level, elections-wise, begins with the Constitution. How do you react?
First, we must understand that, sadly, we've elected people who put personal interest above collective nation interest. Again, we must also understand that this is about control, and this is about influence. Ideally, this should be about resource mobilization and management and administration. But right now, it's more about resource control. So again, and when you look at it closely, it also ties to corruption. The Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit tried to make the local government financially independent, using the instrument of law. But the first group that kicked against this ambitious policy was the Nigerian Governors Forum. Why? because they want to continue to control resources meant for the local government. If you don't get development at the local government area, that's why there's so much pressure at the national. So everybody runs back to the president. Nobody talks about their councillors and their local government chairman. So again, you know, we must look at it from a political point of view. It's not about, you know, we continue to speak this kind of English on TV. Yes, the 1999 Constitution as amended is not a constitution that brings about justice and equity. That is also debatable. To some people, you know, it's a work in progress. To some other people, let's set aside that constitution and have a national constitutional conference and decide what kind of constitution do we want in Nigeria. But then again, my own generation, and this is a message to them, it's exciting that we're having conversation around Sorosoke, you know, and the coconut head generation. But elections are not won on Twitter and Facebook and on social media. How many of us know our ward chairman? Because it starts from the ward, politically speaking. How many of us even know our councillors? So again, let's go back to the grassroots, because if we want to make this change happen and sustainable, we must go back to those same people you call hoodlums or political talks. Those are the people we need to start to change their mindset, you know, build their capacity and expand their horizon on thinking, so that we can bring about that change. And it must start from the ground. Because if we continue to stay at the national level and talk to ourselves on national television, you know, the message will not go to the ground. So we must go to the trenches. We must fold our sleeves and, you know, fold our shokoto and talk to the people on the ground. If the change starts from the ground, the people at the state legislative chambers and the National Assembly would bring about those laws that we want to see. No change would happen except the people on the ground at the grassroots are leading that change, because all of them, and you see, the thing is, we look down on those people. All of them have the numbers of the politicians, their local government, state and federal representative. It would surprise you. They'll call them on the phone. Imagine the kind of pressure if we're able to mobilize and put the amount of pressure that we need to bring about this change. It would happen probably ahead of 2023. So for me, again, let's look at electing leaders that looks at our collective interests, that put Nigeria first rather than their selfish interests. Closely, this is also corruption, because when you want to control resources rather than manage, mobilize, and administer, it means that you're also part of the problem that we see today.
A lot of people were quite shocked, really, because there was the NSAS protest, and you know, it was some form of political awareness for a lot of young people, and they thought, well, this is a litmus test. Let's see if the NSAS protest really had an effect on people's political consciousness. But from the figures we're seeing, it appears it did not. But Mr. Nzako, yes. So at the end of the day, what you see across the states, two major parties, really. In fact, the ruling party actually had, of course, more wins, but you see it's between both parties, the APC and the PDP. Do you think this is also responsible, the fact that we seem to be operating a two-party system, such that people are like, okay, we know where it will swing anyway, so what's the point?
The two-party system that we have today is not legislated. On paper and on records in INEC, there are about 68 political parties. But in practice, they tend to coagulate. They tend to crystallize into two major political parties. And that is by way of political association. And because it is freedom of each individual to belong to whatever association that you like to belong to. Then if you like, you belong to APC. If you like, you belong to PDP. If you like, you belong to any other party. So it is an experience of the people in the political process. My good friend Lawa mentioned about the people not knowing their councillors. And the question is, how would they know their councillors when they did not elect them? If the councillors were appointed from government offices, from government houses and the state level, state headquarters, how would the people now know their councillors and their chairmen? So, elections, most times there were no elections. I mean, how many states out of the 36 that held the local government elections, at least in the past 10 years? And I told you earlier that those ones that held mock elections, we are all what one recent electoral commissioner, I think it's Barrister Mike Egini, called the coronation exercise. It is more or less a coronation exercise. And I call that just an appointment. There's no difference between the SSA to the governor and the chairman of a local government, because they were both appointed by the governor. They call them caretaker committee chairman. And then how would the people now know them? They don't canvass for votes. They don't go to ask for anything. In fact, before the election is done, the list of those that will be sworn in has already been drawn up. You call that democracy? And because it does not permeate down to the grassroots, it is the effect that you're seeing at the state and national level.
You know, one wonders if you've been a part of this such that you have
but
so much information.
but I tell you this because those who have been part of it, ask the civil society groups, and they'll tell you exactly this is exactly what happens. And in cases where a few people are allowed to become councillors from other political parties, it is like they dash them, go and represent us there, and then cross over after the election. So let us give it a seeming cloak of authenticity. So, and that is why those agencies or forum of state independent electoral commission should be asking that the system be changed. It is not just to begin to fight and say we want to conduct an election when they know that their own integrity, personal and official integrity, are being undermined by the activities of the governors who act as emperors.
Well, let's hope that one of these days we'll be able to engage the CX themselves, because we're trying to at least have this conversation with them so we can nip this in the bud, if there's anything to nip in the bud.
That was good.
Well, we have to thank you very much. Fred Nzako is a legal practitioner. Thank you so much for your time.
Many thanks.
As well as Hamzat Lawal, campaigner and chief executive, Connected Development. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Sunrise Daily is back in a moment. Do stay with us.
Well, our next conversation is not so much about the National Assembly in itself, really, but it's about a document that has been considered on the floor of the National Assembly. That's the Finance Bill 2020. You're wondering, how does that concern you? Well, let's find out. And we have joining us this morning Mr. Kolaye, who's an economist and CEO of GDL Asset Management Limited, joins us in our Lagos studio. Beautiful morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
So the finance bill, really, to a lot of people, different things. Some don't even really know what it is, really. They just move on with life. But to you, what is this finance bill 2020 in particular?
Okay, essentially, looking at the finance bill, it's government's effort to finance itself. The things contained in the bill are the efforts of government to plug the holes in the budget and finance itself. So that's what government is seeking to do. And the thing to bear in mind, as they say, is if it's not broke, don't fix it. So when government comes up with a bill that is changing the structure and the process with which it wants to raise money and finance the budget, it means there is either a problem that they're trying to solve, or there are gaps that they have seen in process that they want to improve, or there are areas in the economy they want to encourage.
Quick comparison, if you don't mind, Mr. Aye. The first finance bill, first of its kind, was 2019, no, 2020. And then this one
was 2019.
2019.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what's the difference? What are the differences or similarities you can place? Here, you're saying that this finance bill being proposed is government's effort to finance itself.
Yes.
The previous one, many people applauded it as an attempt by government to stimulate the small and medium enterprises. Do you see that continuing in this new one?
You'll permit me to be frank. You know, the government we have is fiscally irresponsible. We're pushing ourselves to a fiscally unsustainable bind. And what hasn't been done is acknowledging that there are problems which are not sustainable and then deciding on how to plug it. You see, what the fiscal bill 2020 does compared to what comes before it is that it reveals that government sees that it is incurring unsustainable deficits and that it needs to find ways to plug the hole. Now, the question that hasn't been asked is, what got you to that point? If you are in trouble because you are not making enough revenue, then the problem is to plug revenue. But if a major part of your problem is because of unsustainable and inefficient expenditure, you don't go out trying to collect money from everybody simply because you have the power to, when expenditure is irresponsible, and this is how I feel.
What are these expenditures that you can cite?
Okay, for example, let's look at government at all levels. What has happened for the federal government from 2017, to date, is they have ambitious revenue targets which they never meet. Revenue performance compared to budget is usually less than 60%. They have debt service expenditure and recurrent expenditure. They always meet debt service expenditure almost 100%, between 100 and 110%.
You don't want to be a bad debtor.
Because debt service is there.
Yeah.
And recurrent expenditure has sometimes been between 150 to 200%. So government meets its targets on spending money, and it does not meet its target on raising revenues. And you see, the problem is that government expenditure is wasteful. It is significantly inefficient. I mean, a popular whipping boy, of everybody. I saw one of the legislators saying what we budget for the National Assembly is not more than 1% of the entire budget. It shows the way people think. This is a club of less than 500 people. 1% of our budget is 100. I mean, this is what somebody said on here. Then let me give you some other examples why people should worry. All of us, I'm sitting in your Lagos studio. So just to come down to Lagos, let me say one more thing about federal government, which was in the news recently. It's small, but it's indicative. A minister said we need 80 million to cut grass in the National Assembly. This was in the papers a week or two ago. You see, in the last year, over 800 billion was voted for the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs to cater for the problems. And with respect, in the course of the last crisis, we saw what a group of young people achieved with 60 million. What have we done with 800 billion? And let me say the other thing. For a number of years, because of insurgency, our defense budgets are huge. In fact, the defense budget for this year is over 700 billion. Why are we spending money on defense every year and the insurgency persists? And we're going on as if we're not allowed to ask questions. You cannot continue spending money inefficiently and then you desperately start asking for money from everybody. This budget, this fiscal bill, two of the ways he wants to raise money is that he's seeking for government to confiscate all dividends which are unclaimed and all balances in bank accounts which are dormant, defined as monies that are dormant for 6 years. What gives government the right? What makes government a better manager of dormant balances than the banks? When I get to Dubai and I see the signpost of some of the Nigerian banks, it makes me feel proud as a Nigerian. When I go into government departments, I don't feel that way. How has government conducted itself that makes it feel it's a better manager of money that has been left dormant? Why is government a better manager of unclaimed dividends than the companies that own those dividends?
What is wrong with that in itself?
Listen, you see, one of the things we need to come to is that we all have a stake in the country. That's the first thing we need to understand. And then in the country, there are different economic agents. Are you getting me?
Yeah.
So you see, government is an economic agent. Private sector players, companies, are economic agents. Households are economic agents. You look in the course of where you are at and say, in our own peculiarities, who is currently the more efficient manager and administrator of resources? If government is an efficient one, what you do is you get it more efficient. You don't take resources from a more efficient manager and put it in the hands of a less efficient manager. You see, the philosophy of our tax policy is to get money for. That's not the purpose of tax policy. The purpose of tax policy should be to direct resources to the hands of the best manager.
And in this case, not the government.
In Nigeria's case, clearly not. Obviously not.
We referenced the 2019 finance bill, and this is just to weigh the options. I mean, weigh what happened. So for the 2019 finance bill, would you say it was effective in raising money for the government, such that we can now say, well, this 2020 bill will even do much better?
Well, we've not My suspicion is that based on what has happened, some of the crises that we've had this year, we may actually have a situation where the government budget deficit may go completely out of whack. So, you see, let me put it this way. You can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. We were told that, some of the things that are very painful, is that in 2015, the expectations we had for this government was transparency, efficiency, an improvement in quality of government spend. That hasn't happened. The presidential fleet remains as large as it substantially remains as large as it was. We cannot see that government ministries and government departments and government agencies have made significant improvements in the way that they spend money. See, the country is in a fiscal bind. You know what ought to be done? The 2020 Fiscal Responsibility Bill ought to be a desperate attempt to cut expenditure.
So some of those provisions you're seeing are not the ones you expected to see.
No.
So clearly you are saying that this is not about raising money. Really.
Yes.
It's about how we spend the money which we have.
Precisely.
But, you've talked about the National Assembly. You've talked about the executive. And, the arguments that usually come up is some of these things pay salaries. Therefore, overhead costs. They are directly at people who otherwise will be unemployed. So how do you balance that argument? I know you've talked about the 500 legislators, and 1%, that doesn't quite make sense. But how do you balance the argument that this pays salaries of people?
Okay, let me give you one, and I like to be fair. Let me give you something that is reasonable that government has done. Government says government must pay labor. Government is a large employer of labor. So, for example, one of the few things this government got right is saying that we are going to make payroll payments electronic. So we eliminate ghost workers. Do you understand? For example, this year, government workers were probably not at work for 4 to 5 months in the year. I'm waiting for the expenditure on overheads at the end of the year that will not show savings. Because it's people in the office that should drive expenditure. So, what should happen? Where we are at is that on this Fiscal Responsibility Act, fundamentally, one thing we got wrong is that the advanced countries, when they're planning fiscal responsibility, they relate deficit to the size of the GDP. And that's what we've done. You see, in those countries, the informal sector is small. So automatically, when GDP grows, government revenue grows. Because everybody is formal and is in the net. We have a huge informal sector that is also poor. And revenue, GDP growth for us does not mean growth in government revenue. So the first thing we should have done with the fiscal responsibility is to say that we are going to start relating deficit to government revenue, not GDP. And start to say to ourselves that we must go and ensure we spend money, judiciously. There was a point in this country, I'm not even sure we were this broke. Things just looked like they would get a little hard. And we had low profile. Do you know the things we've gotten used to? Do you see the kind of cars that government buys?
Mr.
Do you see the kind of convoys that government officials running?
My apologies. There is a reference that you have made down, which for me is of significant importance. If we're going to, as you said, get out of this fiscal bind that we seem to find ourselves. For most developing nations, the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector is usually huge. Something in the region of 60 to 70% of the economy is usually made of that. How significant is this fiscal bill, this finance bill of government, this one that we are looking at now? How significant is it to help that sector grow so that the economy can benefit from it?
One thing, you see, it's not only important for the SMEs to be large, their quality is also important. You see, the quality of MSMEs that we have in Nigeria is rudimentary. a lot of them are micro enterprises. Micro enterprises don't transform economies. Micro enterprises put the entrepreneurs on survival stipends. You see, economic growth is cohesive and collaborative. You need the very large companies, as you need the medium and the small. You know what happens in economies that work? The very large companies provide first-class quality markets
for the small
and medium scale enterprises.
Now, in this wise, now looking at this bill,
yes,
how does it help these big companies that you're talking about now?
Let me go to how it seeks to even help the small companies. You see, it helps them in theory, but in practice, it doesn't. The major provision of this act, when it relates to small companies, it says if you are between 20 and 100 million in turnover, you are small and you're exempted from tax. You know what it hasn't told us? How much tax did those companies pay before?
When you calculate company income tax, withholding tax, value-added tax, okay, there's exemption from that one. There's the NSITF tax. There's so many other education tax and so many others like that.
Forgive me.
Because I actually had a conversation with someone who said that, they have a significant, was a public forum that there's quite a chunk of money that goes from the MSMEs into
now, maybe I've not read the act well. When I read this act, what I got, and this is just underscoring what you're saying, the impression I got was that this one was intended to to exempt them from things like VAT or withholding tax. It was to exempt them from companies' income tax. The 30% or 20% which they pay. They rarely ever paid it. So the targeting is weak. You see, if there's something I wasn't paying, and you now come and say stop paying it, it looks good on paper. In practice, you've not changed my position. And please let me say something, and I don't want to sound alarmist. You see, this act says two things. It says, if you leave your money in a bank account for 6 years and you don't spend it, government will create an organ from the DMO that will take it and manage it. So, no, I want you to take that one. And you know the second thing? It also says dividends for 6 years, it will take it. You know the second thing it says? It says all of us will pay a 50 naira tax on all electronic transactions.
So here's what we'll do. We'll take a look at those provisions now closely, but we need to go on a break. We're due for a break. So when we return, we'll take a look at these provisions and show you what they say and what that might mean to your business in a moment. Please stay with us. You're welcome back. Now, Mr. Ayeye, there are a few provisions, really. Well, quite a number of provisions in the Finance Bill 2020. And just to put it on record that this is still going through the legislative process, some of these provisions might not eventually be in the Act.
That's right.
We might see some additions, but basically we're looking at what we have as a draft Finance Bill. So we talked about the creation of that Unclaimed Dividend Trust Fund and, of course, for dormant accounts, which a lot of people have kicked against, including you. There's also the Electronic Money Transfer Levy that imposes a levy to be referred to as electronic money transfer on electronic receipts or electronic transfer for money deposited in any DMB. And it says that levy shall be a one-off charge of 50 naira on electronic receipts. But there's also this one about state-owned corporations. You think that's a big game changer, isn't it?
Well, it ought to be. You see, what I'm saying about government efficiency, what government has done with this act is that it says state-owned enterprises should limit the ratio of their costs to revenues to a maximum of 50%. Then it says your surplus, you must put 20% of it in reserves and remit. The simple arithmetic of that is the government is saying every state-owned enterprise must remit a minimum of 10% of its revenues. You know, we are broke. And before extracting money from all of us who are struggling, this talk about state-owned enterprises, why isn't it more rigorous and more transparent? So why don't we sit down so that we all know how much does MPA earn? How much is it supposed to earn? How much does it spend? How much should it spend? How much does NIMASA earn? How much does it spend? And how much should it spend? How much then NDDC? You know, there are some government and there's some state-owned enterprises. Central Bank. What is the expenditure of Central Bank? Some people have said that some of these state-owned enterprises, you aggregate their expenditure and it's even more or as much as the federal government budget. So what I'm saying is, when we're in this bind, why do we just throw a ratio that says you can't spend more than 50% of your revenue? Why don't we start here and drill down? There may be some enterprises that need to spend 70, but there's some that may not need to spend more than 20.
So you'd rather some sort of specificity?
A process that now insists on rigor, that says that we look at your budget from bottom up. In fact, we get external parties that do value for money audit. You know, the way we budget now is that we spent X last year and we're going to spend X plus this year. So why don't we look at it from base zero? So you see, for these state-owned enterprises, CBN, NIMASA, NPA, NDDC, you see, the huge AMCON, the huge state government-owned enterprises, when we're in this bind, we ought to find out how much can these guys really contribute if they are rigorous and efficient. So I'm saying this falls far short. This is a first step, but a first step that does not go nearly enough in a financially desperate situation.
So you think that there's probably some form of, pardon me, some fiscal irresponsibility going on in some of these state-owned enterprises?
Essentially, till date, it has been said that the management of the finances of state-owned enterprises ought to be much more transparent, so that their contribution to the central treasury is at optimal level. It clearly isn't.
To a large extent, Mr. Ayeye, this conversation, of course, the finance bill, has been a lot more about the federal government's responsibilities and hasn't said anything significant about the role and contributions of state governments in all of these. One wonders, because if the state governments they are closer to the people, they are closer to be able to offer them the dividends of democracy, as we say, and be more productive for them. Isn't there a way that this finance bill should address some responsibilities that state governments themselves should take, so that the challenges of the people can be ameliorated a little?
That was one of the first big mistakes of this government. That was their first act of huge fiscal irresponsibility. You see, there is separation of powers. So the federal government can't dictate to the states. But you know what happens? When states are broke and they need bailout, that is the right time to insist that states adopt certain practices and domesticate it and legislate it in their assemblies before the federal government bails them out. You know what we saw in this government? Oil price crashed in 2015. Many states were desperate. This government just kept giving them handouts. That was the time to tell them, listen, we will help the states that do A, B, C, D, E.
I think there were some terms and conditions, maybe not as extensive as you would want, but there were indeed some terms and conditions.
I think those, let me tell you the kind of terms and conditions you need. If you notice what even some of them who have been politicians say, they say when it's time to save, when oil prices are up, and the federal government says we must save, states kick. You know what you do? You tell them to make laws.
Well, you can't. No. You can't dictate.
But you know what I can dictate to? It's not state-federal government relationship. It is lender-borrower relationship. It says to the governor, you want a bailout? I'm not asking you to give me money. I'm saying go and make a law in your state that says that when oil price gets to this level, you know, when the federal government says X, we also save Y for ourselves. You're not saving it for the federal government. And you're saying to them, if you think I want to control you, it's not a problem. Go and sort out your problem.
You know, clearly the public hearing for this bill will be quite an interesting one. And it'll be good to see you there anyway. But we'd like to thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you.
Kalaye,
Thank you
as an
very
economist and CEO, GDL Asset Management Limited. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on the program.
Thank you very much.
Well, we'll go on a break now. When we return, we'll talk health matters, something that has ravaged the world for months now, and we seem to be getting to a closure. But what does that mean for Nigeria? Please stay with us.
More than 60,000 cases of COVID-19 in Nigeria as at present. And over the past few weeks, the numbers seem to be steadily rising again. Oh, there is that news. There is a COVID-19 vaccine in the air. How soon? Any hopes? Well, this morning, to give us some clarity, as Kaide has mentioned earlier, Ike Onyechi joins us this morning. He is a pharmacist. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, our treatment of the issues around COVID-19 and the fact that over now the figures seem to be rising again steadily, even though almost negligibly, but definitely steadily. Are you concerned?
Very worried. I'm only concerned.
Really?
Sure.
Why so?
Concerned because we all watched the figures taper down. We were leveling out, and they were beginning to get comfortable. And suddenly, we saw the rise coming again, and it was embarrassingly so, because though we thank God that we are grateful God has been helping us, and the progression has not been as in America or Europe, but I think we are relaxing more than we should as a nation. Some people don't even believe that COVID is there, and they're going about again.
You know, I jokingly asked if you brought some vaccines for us when you came into the studio, because, I mean, for a lot of people, it was bleak until we started seeing development of vaccines. I mean, from Russia, which is quite controversial, really, to the United States, to UK, even China.
Yeah.
You know, had some development where they tried in some other countries like Brazil, and it was quite controversial. So with this news about vaccines, just how hopeful are you? Because I know as a pharmacist, really, as much as you keep your eyes on the figure, you're also keeping your eyes on the solution. So how much of a hope has this given you?
A lot of hope, I must say. The global community is rejoicing at the development, and it's coming from almost every part of the world. I was looking at the German company, BioNTech. It's a biopharmaceutical technology company working with Pfizer. If you look at their footnotes, you find that they're working with many other companies, still on different types of vaccines, many of them related to the same COVID. So there's a lot of hope that success is coming, or has already knocked on some doors already. And America, they are on Moderna and Pfizer. And in Europe, we are watching the Russians, Sputnik. It's also not sleeping. And AstraZeneca with Oxford University, they almost concluded their own trial, and they look very promising.
There is also that concern a number of people have raised about Nigeria, getting the COVID-19 vaccines, especially in the light of the storage requirements. Are you concerned about that?
Yeah, that's actually the big one there. I'm concerned partly because of the minus 70 degrees, as we speak now, may be very difficult to attain here, but it's not impossible. It's determination. If the nation, if we are proactive about this, since it's working somewhere, if we're determined about it, I'm sure something will happen.
What will it take? Maybe, if you can give us a picture, because some people will be wondering, what does minus 70 degrees mean? What kind of
Temperature.
Yes.
It's like a freezing temperature far below zero as water freezes, and you have ice. So you have to still go down to 70. So it's a sufficiently difficult temperature to attain.
In other words, the freezer in somebody's house is not cold enough.
No, it's not. Definitely not.
So, is it even feasible for us
It's feasible in the world, and there's nothing we cannot do here. You know, everybody determines how successful we can be in life. Well, that philosopher said.
What do we need to do?
We need to be determined.
Yeah.
Proactively.
What do we need to do to get to that level? Bearing in mind a number of things, one of the things a number of people will raise with you is, look, we have power challenges anyway, and we have to sustain electricity, challenges in one way or another. So, what do we need to do to get to that point?
You know why I said it's possible, even at a limited level of government. Government can create this in the government facilities. But it's not something that is replicable easily. It's not something we can roll out, no. In my pharmacy, we have a NAFDAC-approved cold chain facility. It's very difficult to maintain that, to even pass the standards already laid down by NAFDAC. And that's for 2 to 8 degrees. That's the best I'm able to do as we speak.
That's -2 or 2 to 8 degrees?
No, 2.
2 to 8 degrees.
Yes.
Not even at the minus level
no,
yet.
No. That's the normal fridge, a good fridge anyway.
Yeah.
And then a standardized cold room, and NAFDAC lays down the principles and the policy directions in setting up those type of rooms that will have 2 to 8 continually. So it's not an easy standard even to maintain. So -20, -70 is hard. You can extrapolate. I want to be optimistic. That's why I told you that it's possible. But I don't believe in impossibilities.
Absolutely.
Yes, but not. You can't rule out -20. You can't rule out not talk about -70.
Wow. Because, to put this in context, Moderna's vaccine is -20.
-20, yes.
But Pfizer-BioNTech is -70. So
yes.
that means, so at what level can we achieve this? Can we achieve this at the private level?
We also have some, AstraZeneca is coming at room temperature, at a normal temperature, 2 to 8.
Okay.
Sputnik V is 2 to 8. And I'm sure some more research is going on will be focusing on 2 to 8, especially for the third world. So it's not only a Nigerian problem. Third world has a challenge of energy and electricity. And insofar as that remains, it's difficult to use those vaccines. But
I asked a question, the other time.
Yes.
What will it take? Let's put the figures out there, at least what is obvious to us. There are 200 million people in Nigeria. If we're going to, vaccinate everyone in Nigeria, what kind of storage are we looking at? That's one. Now, we have to get facilities that can freeze or house or warehouse and store them at that particular temperature to that degree for so long. So if we are talking about preparing, okay, what do we need to begin to do now? We may have to decentralize, so that, every state, may have a storage facility of sorts and stuff like that, but what do we need to do now to begin? Because clearly, just as you're saying, it will sound like we do not have that technology to freeze to that extent yet. What do we need to do?
Be determined to make a difference. If we are determined, if we proactively pursue this, not the way we have a lot of policy somersaults. And if you're looking at it from that perspective, then I can't suggest anything. But as an optimist that I am, I believe we can start somewhere. Even if one tertiary institution in a state is upgraded to be able to store these vaccines. And the manufacturers, I'm sure, will be coming with something. Don't forget that. The manufacturer knows, Pfizer knows that it's difficult to even have light to keep the 2 to 8 degrees in Nigeria. So if they're making this, they must be making a vehicle, a way of conveying this to the users. Usually, such a global GMPs are determined around end to end, from manufacturer to the consumer. You are still responsible as a manufacturer to ensure that what you've manufactured is taken to the user in the right state. That's part of, if you see definitions of fake products or fake drugs, it's if you deliver this to the user in a state, not the way that was approved by regulators. You already have defaced or denatured. In this case, it will just easily denature if exposed to the temperatures that are adverse.
Because I've seen some of the manufacturers provide GPS tracking devices, such they will know that the temperature didn't drop and be sure that it's still effective.
That is the global standard now.
Yeah.
If you package something at the point of use, at the point of delivery, a tracker is plugged out, fixed in your computer, and it interprets. And if it's something coming from a country, you send it back to the manufacturer, and immediately you get the report. Things have been delivered and found to have lost their validity because the temperature was interrupted. Actually, we had an instance once. There was a delay of flight somewhere, and they still continued the next day and got the product here because we needed to take that tracker back to the maker. The next day, they said, no.
This hasn't worked. Well, two issues I'd like you to...
It was already bad, so we discarded it.
Pardon me, two issues just before we wind down. So you've outlined the different vaccines and their temperatures, and it will seem that it's AstraZeneca's and maybe Russia's Sputnik 5 that we can handle based on the facilities we have between 2 and 8 degrees, right? So that has maybe narrowed down our options to AstraZeneca and maybe Russia's
maybe some
vaccine.
are still coming anyway.
And maybe the ones still coming. So we shouldn't look at the Modernas,
No, we don't.
Pfizer's.
That's why I said I'm an optimist. Don't
Never rule anything out.
faint because of something minus 70 degrees.
Because we've handled vaccines, really. I mean, we've handled a lot of vaccines. We've handled yellow fever vaccines. We've handled
those
some other
can
countries.
stay comfortable at 2 to 8 degrees.
So we have some level of experience, right?
Oh, sure. A lot of it. NAFDAC is there laying the standards, and you can't mess up with them.
Okay, so aside the storage...
And even the standards are changing. Even the one we had 5 years ago. In the last 2-3 years, there was upgrade. You come round and probably where you used to put one thermometer in a small cold room, you find that the standard now is you have to put at every corner of the room, and then you have to take a graph to be sure that the temperature is maintained at that 2 to 8. Because I realized when they were doing that different parts of the cold room, so we are 2, so we are 7, so we are 8. Okay. So, but you have to put it now at different points, and
to ensure
they have to ensure that all of the room is within that 2 to 8.
Okay. Well, there's this talk also about while we wait for these vaccines, because clearly, I don't know how quickly any organization will be able to make 7 billion vaccines for 7 billion people in the world. But so there's this talk in the nation as well for some other options. Do you think we have even attempted a build-up to the point of getting some local solutions or local options to the vaccine?
Oh, why not? The immunization happens not only by use of vaccines. There are other pharmaceutical products, like when it comes to gene therapy, immune therapy. There are other monoclonal antibodies that are not the regular ones that you develop within the body. When you immunize, the body builds up the antibodies that give protection and give immunity. But these can come also from natural sources. We found that some of our natural products are being researched now.
Okay.
And
that's at the NAFDAC level already?
Individuals are working on them. I don't know what NAFDAC, if they've got up to NAFDAC, but
Okay.
a number of people have indicated what they're working on.
Okay.
And there's still hope that something can come up locally.
We really are. We're looking out for that hope. But we have to thank you very much for your time this morning. Ike Onyechi is a pharmacist and fellow of Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, as well as fellow West African Postgraduate College of Pharmacists. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Well, just before we go, a few messages. Big Bro says about fiscal discipline. Fiscal indiscipline has been a major issue in Nigeria. It's only the elites that benefit while the masses suffer. There should be balanced fiscal policy.
Okay, let's take a look at this next tweet coming from Abdul Rashid, I believe. Oh, that's Abdul Qadir Nasidi saying, I totally agree with you. It takes a Herculean task, or it's a Herculean task to register for PVC and even more difficult to renew it. But we already have a BVN, ATM card, driver's license, and many other database. Why not harmonize them with INEC Nigeria Register? Big question there.
Well, about credible elections, Amos says, regarding our political terrain, the citizens have been cut off from the system. Until we have credible elections at local level, citizens' participation is muzzled. Local council officials are pencils in the hands of their masters. Wow, interesting. Well, that's Sunrise Daily today. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope we have made your day. Have a wonderful day and enjoy. I'm Ayo Makinde.
And I'm Kaide Fikele. Thank you for joining us.